The business trip announcement came on a Tuesday morning, delivered with the same casual tone Margot used to discuss grocery lists or weekend plans. "Chicago conference runs through Friday," she said, not looking up from her phone as she sipped her coffee. "Probably won't be back until Saturday evening." I nodded from behind my newspaper, playing the role of the distracted husband perfectly. 22 years of marriage had taught me the art of appearing disinterested while cataloging every detail. The way she avoided eye contact, the slight tremor in her voice when she mentioned the timeline, the fact that she'd never mentioned this conference before yesterday. "Which hotel?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "The Palmer House. Kenneth booked the rooms since it's a firm retreat." Kenneth Draper, her boss at Whitmore, Cross & Associates. Managing partner, 52 years old, recently divorced, and according to office gossip, quite the charmer. I'd met him twice at firm parties, where he'd given me the kind of handshake that lasted 3 seconds too long, while his eyes already moved past me to more important people. "Sounds expensive," I said. "The firm covers it." She finally looked at me, her green eyes holding that familiar flash of irritation. "Some of us have careers that require professional development, Victor." There it was. The subtle dig about my tech repair shop downtown. Blue-collar work wasn't glamorous enough for Margot's social circle at the yacht club, where wives discussed their husbands' careers like comparing jewelry. I ran a successful business, employed 6 people, and pulled in more annual revenue than half the lawyers in town. But I fixed computers instead of filing motions, so I remained perpetually beneath her aspirations. "Of course," I said. "Have a productive conference." She left that afternoon with a suitcase that seemed awfully large for a 3-day business trip. I watched from my workshop window as her BMW pulled out of our driveway, noting the time. 2:47 p.m. Then I got to work. 24 years in the Army taught me patience and preparation. 12 of those years in military intelligence taught me surveillance and analysis. The past 8 years running Ashford Tech Solutions taught me that information is power, and power properly applied can solve any problem. I started with her laptop, the one she'd left charging in the kitchen. Margot was brilliant with legal research, but hopeless with digital security. Her password was our wedding anniversary, and she'd saved every login credential in her browser. Within 30 minutes, I had access to her email, banking, social media, and phone records. The Palmer House reservation existed, all right. 2 rooms booked under the firm's account, but the credit card charges on her personal account told a different story. Dinner reservations at Alinea for 2 people. Tickets to a Cubs game, a spa appointment at the Four Seasons. Her phone's location services painted the clearest picture. Instead of heading toward Chicago, she'd driven to Kenneth's penthouse apartment on Harbor Drive. The GPS showed her car parked in his building's garage since 3:15 p.m. I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and settled into my chair to think. The smart move would be confrontation, followed by divorce proceedings. Clean, simple, expensive, but final. Margot would get half of everything, including the business I'd built from nothing, and she'd walk away with her dignity intact. But I'd never been accused of taking the smart path. My phone buzzed with a text from Tommy Russo, my best friend since high school and current owner of The Anchor, the dive bar where locals went to avoid the yacht club crowd. "Beer tonight? Jenny's visiting her sister." I typed back. "Rain check. Planning something." Famous last words. Don't do anything stupid. Too late for that advice. I was already 3 moves ahead, and stupid wasn't the word I'd use. Thorough, maybe. Comprehensive. Margot wanted to play games with our marriage? Fine. But she'd learned that underestimating the blue-collar husband was her first mistake. The next morning, I called my shop and told Jax, my lead technician, that I'd be working from home for a few days. Family emergency. Then I settled in to monitor Margot's digital footprint, like a spider watching its web. Her social media posts showed carefully staged photos of conference sessions and Chicago landmarks, all time-stamped and geotagged to support her cover story. Professional work, actually. If I hadn't already known she was lying, the deception might have been convincing. But her credit card told the truth. Room service charges from the Four Seasons, shopping at Michigan Avenue boutiques, a jewelry purchase at Tiffany that made my jaw clench. She was spending our money to finance her affair, adding insult to the betrayal. By Thursday evening, I had enough evidence to bury her in divorce court. But evidence wasn't revenge, and revenge was what my wounded pride demanded. Margot had spent years making me feel small, inadequate, beneath her social aspirations. She'd turned our marriage into a performance where I played the disappointing supporting character to her leading lady. Time to rewrite the script. Friday afternoon, I drove to Kenneth's building and confirmed what I already knew. Her BMW sat in the parking garage covered with 3 days of dust. I took photos, noting the license plate and parking timestamp on the garage ticket visible through the windshield. That evening, I implemented phase 1 of my plan. Using her laptop, I sent Kenneth an email from Margot's account. "Victor's coming back early from his Chicago trip. Can you meet me at the house tomorrow night around 9? He'll be at Tommy's bar until late, and we need to talk about our situation." Then I deleted the sent message and cleared the browser history. Saturday morning, Margot called to confirm her cover story. "Flight lands at 6, she said, her voice bright with false cheer. "I'll grab dinner at the airport and be home by 8. "Looking forward to hearing about the conference," I said. "Oh, it was incredibly productive. Learned so much." "I'm sure you did," I thought. The day crawled by like Christmas morning in reverse. I cleaned the house, organized my tools, and rehearsed various scenarios in my head. By 8:30, I was positioned in the kitchen with the lights off, sitting in the breakfast nook where shadows from the hallway would hide me completely. 9 o'clock came and went. Then 9:15. At 9:23, headlights swept across the front windows. I heard a car door slam, followed by footsteps on the porch. The front door opened, and Kenneth Draper walked into my house like he owned it. He moved with casual familiarity, hanging his jacket on the coat rack and checking his reflection in the hall mirror. This wasn't his first visit. The realization hit me like a physical blow. How long had this been going on? How many times had he been here while I was at work, walking through my home, probably laughing about the clueless husband who paid the mortgage on their love nest? He called out softly, "Margot? Where are you?" I waited. Patience was everything now. Kenneth walked toward the kitchen, his footsteps confident on the hardwood floors. He rounded the corner and reached for the light switch. "Looking for someone?" I said. He froze like a deer in headlights, his hand still raised toward the switch. In the dim light from the hallway, I could see his face cycle through confusion, recognition, and pure terror in the space of 3 seconds. "Victor," his voice cracked slightly. "I thought you were in Chicago." "Did you?" I stood slowly, letting the shadows fall away from me like a stage curtain. "Funny thing about business trips, Kenneth. Sometimes they get canceled." He took a step backward, bumping into the kitchen island. "I was just... Margot asked me to... To what? Water the plants? Check on the house? Use the key she gave you to make yourself comfortable in my home?" The color drained from his face. "Key? I don't know what you're talking about." I pulled out my phone and showed him the screen, security camera footage of him entering through the front door. Funny how technology works these days. High-definition video, automatic cloud backup, timestamp verification, very admissible in court. Kenneth's mouth opened and closed without sound. His expensive suit, perfectly styled hair, and practiced courtroom confidence meant nothing now. He was just another middle-aged man caught in a lie, sweating in my kitchen at 9:30 on a Saturday night. "Where's Margot?" he finally managed. Excellent question. According to her story, she should be home from Chicago by now. But according to her credit card records, she's been staying at the Four Seasons with you since Tuesday afternoon. I moved closer, close enough to smell his cologne and see the panic in his eyes. Here's what's going to happen, Kenneth. You're going to leave my house, drive back to your penthouse, and think very carefully about your next moves. Because this conversation, this is me being nice. He nodded frantically and stumbled toward the door. I followed at a leisurely pace, watching him fumble with the handle in his haste to escape. Oh, and Kenneth? He turned back, his face pale in the porch light. Tell my wife I'll be waiting when she gets home. We have so much to discuss. He practically ran to his car, a silver Porsche that probably cost more than most people's houses. The engine roared to life, and he sped away like the devil himself was chasing him. I went back inside and poured another bourbon, settling into my chair to wait for Margot. The real confrontation was still coming, but this appetizer had been deeply satisfying. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. This isn't what it looks like. I typed back, You're right, it's worse. Come home, Margot. Time to discuss your Chicago conference. The response came immediately. How did you know? I'm smarter than you think. Always have been. 20 minutes later, her BMW pulled into the driveway. I watched from the front window as she sat in the car for several minutes, probably trying to figure out her next move. Finally, she got out and walked to the door with the careful steps of someone approaching a minefield. She found me in the living room, sitting in my favorite chair with the bourbon and a manila folder full of printed evidence. Victor, I can explain everything. I'm sure you can. You're a lawyer, after all. Explaining things is what you do. I gestured to the couch across from me. Please sit. Let's hear your story. She perched on the edge of the cushions, her designer clothes and perfect makeup looking absurdly formal for a midnight marriage crisis. The conference was real. I did learn things. I'm sure you learned plenty, like how to use our joint credit card to buy jewelry for yourself while lying to your husband, like how to stage social media posts to support a false alibi, like how to give your lover a key to our home so he can visit whenever he pleases. Her composure cracked slightly. You don't understand the pressure I'm under at work. Kenneth and it's complicated. Complicated. I tasted the word like wine. That's one way to describe adultery. Here's another way. Breach of contract. You remember contracts, don't you? Legal documents where parties agree to specific terms and conditions. I opened the folder and pulled out our marriage certificate. 22 years ago, we signed this contract, forsaking all others in sickness and health for richer or poorer. Seems pretty straightforward to me. Margot's eyes flashed with her old defiance. Don't lecture me about contracts, Victor. You've been emotionally absent for years. When was the last time we went anywhere together? When did you last show interest in my career, my dreams, my life? Your life? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You mean the life I've been financing while you played social climber at the yacht club? The dreams I supported while you looked down on my work? The career I celebrated while you made jokes about your blue-collar husband to your lawyer friends? She had the grace to look ashamed, but only for a moment. This isn't just about Kenneth. Our marriage has been over for years. We've just been going through the motions. Maybe you have. I've been trying to save something that was already gone. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the street where Kenneth had fled 30 minutes earlier. But you're right about one thing. This marriage is over. So what happens now? Her voice was smaller, more vulnerable than I'd heard it in years. I turned back to face her, and she must have seen something in my expression that made her shrink back into the couch cushions. Now? Now you learn what happens when you underestimate the person you promised to love and honor? You wanted complicated, Margot? You're about to get more complicated than you can handle. Sunday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood perfectly. Margot had retreated to the guest bedroom after our midnight confrontation, and I'd spent the night in my chair, planning my next moves like a general preparing for battle. The first rule of warfare: know your enemy's weaknesses. Margot's greatest weakness was also her greatest strength: her image. Everything she did was calculated to maintain her position in the social hierarchy of our small coastal town. The yacht club membership, the designer clothes, the carefully curated social media presence, all of it served the same purpose: proving she was better than her middle-class upbringing suggested. Her second weakness was her assumption that I was too nice, too passive, too grateful for her attention to ever fight back. 22 years of marriage had taught her that Victor Ashford would grumble and complain, but ultimately accept whatever scraps of affection she threw his way. Time to update her education. I started with the joint accounts. Every credit card, checking account, and investment portfolio that bore both our names got locked down with fraud alerts and security freezes. Margot's spending spree was officially over. Next, I called my lawyer sister Nina in Portland. She answered on the second ring, her voice sharp with professional efficiency. "Victor, it's 7 in the morning on a Sunday. Someone better be in the hospital." "Worse, Margot's been cheating with her boss. I caught them last night." The silence stretched for several seconds. Nina had never liked Margot, but she'd kept her opinions mostly to herself for the sake of family peace. "How long has it been going on?" "At least since Tuesday, probably longer. They've been using our house, Nina. He has a key." "Jesus." Nina's voice went cold. "What do you need from me?" "Legal advice. I want to make sure I'm protected when this gets ugly." "It's already ugly, Victor. But I understand what you mean. Are you filing for divorce?" "Eventually. But first, I want them to understand the consequences of their choices." Be very careful with that kind of thinking. Revenge has a way of backfiring in family court. "I'm not planning anything illegal, just educational." Nina sighed. "Document everything. Keep records of all financial transactions, communications, evidence of the affair. And Victor, don't do anything that could be construed as harassment or threats. The high road is boring, but it wins custody battles and property settlements." After we hung up, I heard movement upstairs. Margot was awake, probably trying to figure out how much trouble she was in. I decided to help her with that calculation. I knocked on the guest bedroom door. "Coffee's ready. Go away, Victor. We need to discuss the practical arrangements, unless you'd prefer to have this conversation through lawyers." The door opened, revealing Margot in an old bathrobe, her makeup smeared and her hair disheveled. She looked like a different person from the polished professional who'd left for her fake conference 5 days ago. "What arrangements?" "Your living situation, for starters. Kenneth's apartment seems like the obvious choice since you've been staying there anyway." Her face flushed. "This is my house, too." "Actually, it's not. I bought this house 3 years before we got married. Your name is on the deed as a courtesy, but the mortgage, property taxes, and maintenance have all come from my business accounts." That was a lie, but a useful one. In reality, Massachusetts law would give her significant claim to the property regardless of whose name was on the original paperwork. But Margot's legal expertise was in employment law, not family court, and her emotional state wasn't conducive to careful analysis. "You can't just kick me out." "I'm not kicking you out. I'm suggesting you might be more comfortable staying with someone who actually wants your company." She stared at me for a long moment, probably trying to reconcile this cold, calculating version of her husband with the accommodating man she'd married. "What do you want from me, Victor?" "Nothing. That's the point. I don't want anything from you anymore." I left her standing in the doorway and went downstairs to make breakfast. 20 minutes later, she appeared in the kitchen dressed for battle in a sharp business suit and full makeup. "I'm going to Kenneth's to think about this situation." "Excellent idea. Take your time." She paused at the door, clearly expecting more of a reaction. "This doesn't have to be vindictive, Victor. We can handle this like adults." "Of course we can. Adults face the consequences of their choices." After she left, I called Tommy at the Anchor. He answered over the sound of clinking glasses and morning regulars arguing about the Red Sox. "Victor, you sound like hell." "Feel like it too. Can you meet me at the shop in an hour? I need a favor." "What kind of favor?" "The kind that requires your old police contacts and a complete lack of conscience." Tommy was quiet for a moment. "This about Margot? How did you know?" "Lucky guess. Give me an hour to get someone to cover the bar." Ashford Tech Solutions occupied a converted warehouse in the old part of town where rent was cheap and parking was plentiful. I'd built the business from nothing, starting with computer repairs in my garage and gradually expanding into network security, data recovery, and custom software solutions. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was profitable and respected by the people who understood what I actually did. Tommy arrived as I was opening the shop, bringing coffee and the kind of grim expression he'd worn during his 15 years as a state trooper. "Talk to me." I gave him the full story, from Margot's fake conference to Kenneth's midnight visit to my plans for making them both regret their choices. "So you want revenge?" "I want justice. There's a difference." Tommy leaned against my workbench, studying me with cop eyes. "Justice is what happens in courtrooms. Revenge is what happens when people take matters into their own hands. Then call it education. They both need to learn that actions have consequences." "And you're going to teach them?" "I'm going to provide learning opportunities." Tommy laughed despite himself. "You always were too smart for your own good. What do you need from me?" "Background checks on Kenneth Draper, financial records, legal troubles, anything that might be useful in negotiations." "Negotiations?" "Divorce proceedings. Property settlement. The kind of conversations where information is leverage." Tommy nodded slowly. "I can make some calls. But Victor, be careful how you use whatever I find. The line between justice and harassment is thinner than you think." "Understood." While Tommy worked his contacts, I dove into Kenneth's digital footprint, social media profiles, professional associations, business registrations, property records, everything that painted a picture of his life and priorities. Kenneth Draper was a man who valued his reputation above all else. Managing partner at a prestigious firm, member of the yacht club's board of directors, donor to local charities, divorced father of 2 college-age children. His LinkedIn profile read like a campaign biography, all achievements and accolades with no hint of human flaws. That pristine image was about to develop some cracks. I started with his professional associations. Kenneth served on the ethics committee of the State Bar Association, a position that required absolute moral authority. A quick search of public records revealed that his divorce had been finalized just 8 months ago, citing irreconcilable differences but sealed from public view. Interesting timing. Had his affair with Margot started before or after his divorce? The timeline could be significant in both his professional standing and any future legal proceedings. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Can you meet me for lunch?" I didn't recognize the number, but the timing suggested Kenneth had found his courage and wanted to negotiate. I typed back, "The Anchor, noon." "Somewhere more private?" "The Anchor, noon, or we can discuss this through lawyers." Tommy returned an hour later with a manila folder and a satisfied expression. "Your boy Kenneth has some interesting history." "Such as?" "Divorce wasn't as clean as his public image suggests. Ex-wife filed a restraining order that was later dropped. Allegations of emotional abuse, controlling behavior, financial manipulation." "Allegations?" "Nothing proven in court, but the paperwork exists. Also, he's got some questionable business dealings. The firm represents several clients who've had EPA violations, and Kenneth personally owns property that's been cited for environmental issues." "Anything criminal?" "Not yet, but the EPA stuff could become a problem if someone filed complaints with the right agencies." I smiled for the first time in days. Tommy, you're a beautiful man. Save the compliments. What are you planning? Lunch with Kenneth. Want to come along for moral support? Wouldn't miss it. The Anchor at noon on a Sunday was exactly what I'd hoped for, crowded with locals, noisy enough to provide cover for private conversations, and public enough to prevent Kenneth from trying anything dramatic. Tommy positioned himself at the bar with a clear view of our table, while I waited in a corner booth with my back to the wall. Kenneth arrived 10 minutes late, looking like he hadn't slept. His usual courtroom confidence was nowhere to be seen, replaced by the nervous energy of a man who'd finally realized he was in over his head. Victor. He slid into the booth across from me, his eyes darting around the room. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Thank you for choosing such a public venue to discuss your affair with my wife. He winced. Keep your voice down. Why? Worried about your reputation? Kenneth leaned forward, lowering his voice to barely above a whisper. This situation has gotten out of hand. Margot and I, it wasn't supposed to happen like this. How was it supposed to happen? You seduce my wife, use my house for your meetings, and I just accept it gracefully. You don't understand the pressure we've both been under. The firm is going through a difficult transition, and Margot has been invaluable in managing the personnel issues. Is that what you call it? Personnel management? Kenneth's face flushed. This is exactly why I wanted to meet privately. You're being deliberately inflammatory. I'm being honest. You want diplomatic language? Here it is. You violated the trust of a colleague, damaged a marriage, and potentially exposed yourself to professional sanctions. How's that for inflammatory? Professional sanctions? I pulled out my phone and showed him a screenshot of the State Bar Association's ethics guidelines. Conduct involving dishonesty, fraud, deceit, or misrepresentation. Inappropriate relationships with employees or subordinates. Behavior that negatively reflects on a lawyer's fitness to practice law. Kenneth's face went pale. Margot isn't my subordinate. She's an HR director. Who reports to you? Who you have authority to hire, fire, promote, or demote. Who you've been having an affair with while she's married to another man. You can't prove anything. I pulled out my folder of evidence, credit card records, hotel receipts, photographs, security camera footage. I can prove everything. Kenneth stared at the papers like they were radioactive. What do you want? I want you to understand the consequences of your choices. You thought you were smarter than the blue-collar husband, didn't you? Thought I'd never figure it out, or if I did, I'd be too intimidated to fight back. That's not... I never thought... Yes, you did. You looked at me and saw someone beneath your notice. Someone who didn't matter. Someone whose feelings and dignity were acceptable casualties in your midlife crisis. Kenneth's hands were shaking now. I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. But it did go this far, and now you're going to learn what happens when you underestimate people. I stood to leave, gathering my papers. Enjoy the rest of your lunch, Kenneth, and give Margot my regards when you see her. Wait. He grabbed my arm as I passed his chair. What are you going to do with that information? I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back at his face. That depends entirely on what you do next. He released my arm like it had burned him. This isn't over. No, I agreed. It's just beginning. Monday morning brought the first real test of my strategy. Margot showed up at the house at 8:30, using her key to enter like nothing had changed. I was in the kitchen drinking coffee and reading the news on my tablet when she walked in. We need to establish some ground rules, she announced, setting her purse on the counter with more force than necessary. Do we? I'm not moving out of my own house because you're having a tantrum. I looked up from my tablet, studying her face. She'd applied her makeup with extra care this morning, armor for the battle she expected to fight. The designer suit was new, probably purchased during her Chicago shopping spree with our joint credit card. Interesting perspective. Tell me, how did your Sunday evening go? Did Kenneth provide adequate comfort and support during this difficult time? Her jaw tightened. Kenneth and I discussed the situation like adults. We've decided to handle this professionally. Professionally. I tasted the word. Is that what you call it when a managing partner has an affair with a married employee? I'm not just an employee. I'm the HR director, and what Kenneth and I do in our personal time is none of your business. Actually, it became my business when you gave him a key to our house. It became my business when you used our money to finance your affair. It became my business when you lied to my face for weeks about where you were and who you were with. Margot moved to the coffee maker, her movements sharp and precise. I don't owe you explanations about my personal relationships. You're right. You don't owe me explanations. You owe me half of everything we've built together, plus whatever damages a family court judge thinks are appropriate for adultery and breach of marital contract. She spun around, coffee mug in hand. You're threatening me? I'm informing you. There's a difference. Fine. If that's how you want to play this, I'll call my lawyer today. Excellent idea. Make sure you mention the key you gave Kenneth, the hotel receipts, and the security camera footage. I'm sure your lawyer will find those details fascinating. For the first time since she'd walked in, Margot looked uncertain. What security camera footage? I pulled out my phone and showed her the video of Kenneth entering our house Saturday night. High definition, automatic cloud backup, timestamp verification, very admissible in court. The color drained from her face as she watched Kenneth use his key to enter our home. You set him up. I provided him with an opportunity to make choices. He chose poorly. You manipulated the situation. I told the truth. You were supposed to be coming home from Chicago, remember? Kenneth came here expecting to meet you. The fact that you were both lying about your whereabouts isn't my fault. Margot set down her coffee mug with shaking hands. What do you want from me, Victor? I want you to understand that your actions have consequences. You've spent years treating me like an accessory to your life, something convenient but ultimately disposable. Now you're learning that I'm not as disposable as you thought. This isn't about consequences. This is about control. You're absolutely right. For 22 years, you've controlled our marriage, our social life, our financial priorities, even how I'm allowed to feel about my own career. You've made me feel small and inadequate and grateful for whatever attention you decided to give me. I stood and moved closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. But you made one crucial mistake, Margot. You forgot that I'm actually good at things. I'm good at solving problems, gathering information, and planning complex operations. Skills you never bothered to respect because they didn't fit your image of what success looks like. So this is revenge? This is education. You're learning what I'm capable of when I stop trying to make you happy and start focusing on protecting myself. She stared at me for a long moment, probably trying to reconcile this cold, calculating version of her husband with the accommodating man she'd married. I need to get to work. Of course you do. Give Kenneth my regards. After she left, I called Jax at the shop and told him I'd be working from home again. Then I settled in at my computer to implement phase 2 of my plan. Margot's professional life was built on her reputation as an HR expert who could handle sensitive personnel issues with discretion and competence. She'd cultivated relationships with other HR directors throughout the region, spoke at conferences, and published articles in trade journals about workplace ethics and legal compliance. That reputation was about to face some challenges. I started with her professional social media accounts, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, all carefully curated to present the image of a successful, ethical professional. But social media was a double-edged sword, and the same platforms that had built her reputation could be used to damage it. I created several fake accounts using stock photos and generic biographical information. Not enough to fool a determined investigation, but sufficient for my purposes. Then I began posting comments on Margot's professional content, subtle questions about workplace ethics, references to recent news stories about HR directors who'd violated professional standards, links to articles about the legal risks of supervisor-subordinate relationships. Nothing directly accusatory, nothing that could be traced back to me, but enough to plant seeds of doubt in the minds of her professional contacts. Next, I turned my attention to Kenneth's business relationships. As managing partner of Whitmore, Cross & Associates, he was responsible for the firm's reputation and client relationships. A few carefully placed phone calls to competing firms, expressing concern about potential conflicts of interest and ethical violations, would start rumors circulating through the legal community. Again, nothing directly actionable, but enough to make potential clients think twice about entrusting sensitive matters to a firm whose leadership might be compromised. My phone rang around noon. Tommy's name appeared on the caller ID. "Victor, you need to see something. Can you meet me at the shop?" "What kind of something?" "The kind that changes everything." I found Tommy waiting in my office with another manila folder and a grim expression. "Remember those EPA violations I mentioned? Turns out Kenneth's been busier than we thought." He spread out a collection of documents, property records, environmental reports, legal filings, and correspondence between Kenneth's firm and various regulatory agencies. Kenneth doesn't just represent clients with environmental problems. He owns properties that are causing environmental problems. Specifically, 3 commercial buildings with underground storage tanks that have been leaking petroleum products into the groundwater for the past 2 years. I studied the documents, recognizing the addresses. All 3 properties were in the historic district, where environmental violations would be especially damaging to the community's tourism-dependent economy. The State Environmental Agency has been trying to force cleanup and remediation, but Kenneth's been using legal delays and procedural challenges to avoid compliance. Meanwhile, the contamination is spreading. How bad? Bad enough that if the local newspaper got hold of this information, Kenneth would be facing criminal charges, not just civil penalties. I leaned back in my chair, processing the implications. And you just happened to discover this information? I have friends in various agencies, friends who are frustrated with lawyers who use technicalities to avoid environmental responsibility. Friends who might be willing to share information with concerned citizens. Friends who believe the public has a right to know when their groundwater is being contaminated by negligent property owners. I smiled. "Tommy, you're a gift to humanity." "Save the compliments. What are you planning to do with this?" "I'm planning to provide Kenneth with another educational opportunity." My phone buzzed with a text from Margot. "Kenneth wants to meet with you again. Tonight, 7 p.m., his office." I showed the message to Tommy. "Looks like Kenneth is ready for his next lesson." "You want backup?" "Absolutely. But this time, I want you inside the room." That evening, Tommy and I arrived at Whitmore, Cross & Associates 15 minutes early. The law firm occupied the top 2 floors of a renovated Victorian mansion overlooking the harbor, all polished wood and brass fixtures designed to project stability and success. Kenneth met us in the lobby, his usual confidence replaced by nervous energy. "Victor, I wasn't expecting you to bring company." "Tommy Russo, meet Kenneth Draper. Tommy used to be a state trooper, now he's a small business owner. We thought it might be useful to have a witness for this conversation." Kenneth's face went pale. "A witness?" "For legal protection. You understand the importance of documentation, I'm sure." We followed Kenneth to his corner office, where floor-to-ceiling windows provided a spectacular view of the harbor. The walls were covered with diplomas, awards, and photographs of Kenneth with various local politicians and business leaders. "Please, sit." Kenneth gestured to the chairs in front of his desk, then settled into his own chair with the careful movements of a man trying to project authority he didn't feel. "Thank you for coming. I wanted to discuss a resolution to our situation." "What kind of resolution?" Kenneth pulled out a legal document and slid it across the desk. "A confidentiality agreement. In exchange for your discretion regarding my relationship with Margot, I'm prepared to offer financial compensation." I picked up the document and scanned the first page. You're offering to pay me to keep quiet about your affair with my wife? I'm offering to compensate you for the emotional distress this situation has caused. How much emotional distress do you think I've suffered, Kenneth? The agreement specifies $50,000. Tommy whistled softly. 50 grand to keep your mouth shut about something that's already happened. That's interesting. Kenneth's eyes darted between us. It's a fair offer. It's an admission of guilt, I said, and it's nowhere near enough. What do you mean? I pulled out my own folder and spread the EPA documents across Kenneth's desk. I mean that your problems are bigger than an affair with a married employee. Kenneth stared at the environmental reports like they were venomous snakes. Where did you get these? Public records. Amazing what you can find when you know where to look. These are confidential regulatory documents. These are public health hazards that you've been covering up for 2 years while groundwater contamination spreads through the historic district. Kenneth's hands were shaking as he gathered the papers. You don't understand the complexity of environmental law. These matters take time to resolve properly. 2 years, Kenneth. 2 years of legal delays while petroleum products leak into the drinking water supply. 2 years of putting profits ahead of public safety. You can't prove any wrongdoing. I don't have to prove anything. I just have to ask questions. Questions like, why is the managing partner of a prestigious law firm using legal technicalities to avoid cleaning up his own environmental violations? Questions like, what other corners has he been cutting in his business and personal life? Kenneth slumped in his chair, the fight going out of him. What do you want? I want you to understand that your $50,000 offer is insulting. You're not just dealing with a cuckolded husband anymore, Kenneth. You're dealing with someone who has the resources and motivation to make your life very complicated. Are you threatening me? I'm educating you, the same way you've been educating my wife about the exciting world of adultery. Kenneth looked at Tommy, perhaps hoping for sympathy from another man. This is harassment. Tommy shrugged. Looks like a business negotiation to me. Man has information. Other man wants to keep that information private. Basic market economics. How much? Kenneth's voice was barely above a whisper. How much what? How much do you want to make this go away? I leaned back in my chair, enjoying the moment. Kenneth, you're still thinking like a lawyer. You think everything can be solved with money and legal agreements, but this isn't about money. Then what is it about? It's about respect. It's about consequences. It's about learning that other people's lives and feelings matter. I stood and gathered my papers. You and Margot wanted to play games with my marriage? Fine, but now you're playing by my rules. Wait. Kenneth half rose from his chair. What are you going to do? I'm going to provide both of you with learning opportunities. Educational experiences that help you understand the consequences of your choices. This isn't over. No, I agreed. It's just getting started. As Tommy and I left the building, he shook his head in admiration. You're enjoying this way too much. 22 years of being treated like a second-class citizen in my own marriage. I think I've earned the right to enjoy their discomfort. Just remember what I said about the line between justice and harassment. Don't worry. I have no intention of crossing any lines. What's your definition of crossing lines? I smiled. I'll know it when I see it. Tuesday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made our coastal town look like a postcard. I was in my workshop, ostensibly repairing a client's laptop, but actually monitoring the digital chaos I'd unleashed on Margot and Kenneth's professional lives. The fake social media accounts had done their work. Margot's LinkedIn posts were attracting uncomfortable questions about workplace ethics and supervisor-subordinate relationships. Her Twitter mentions included links to recent news stories about HR directors who'd been fired for violating professional standards. The comments weren't directly accusatory. I'd been careful about that. But they were creating exactly the kind of professional embarrassment that would eat at her image-conscious soul. Kenneth was facing similar pressures. 3 potential clients had called competing law firms instead of Whitmore, Cross and Associates, citing concerns about the firm's leadership and ethical standards. The legal community was small and gossipy, and rumors about Kenneth's personal life were spreading faster than I'd anticipated. My phone rang around 10 a.m. Margot's name appeared on the caller ID. "Victor, we need to talk." "Good morning to you too, dear. How's your Tuesday shaping up?" "Don't play games with me, I know what you're doing." "I'm repairing computers and minding my own business." "What are you doing?" "You're sabotaging my professional reputation. The managing director at Harrison and Associates just called to ask if I was having personal difficulties that might affect my judgment." "That's unfortunate. Did you tell him about your affair with your boss?" The silence stretched for several seconds. "You're destroying my career." "I'm not destroying anything. I'm simply allowing the consequences of your choices to play out naturally. This has to stop." "What has to stop? Your affair? Your lies? Your complete disrespect for our marriage?" "You know what I mean." "Actually, I don't." "Be specific, Margot. What exactly do you want me to stop doing?" Another pause. "I want you to stop spreading rumors about me." "I haven't spread any rumors. I've shared facts with people who have legitimate interests in those facts." "What facts?" "The fact that you're having an affair with your boss. The fact that you've been lying to your husband for weeks. The fact that you gave your lover a key to our house. The fact that you used our joint credit cards to finance your deception. Those are private matters. They were private matters until you made them public by conducting your affair so carelessly. Hotel receipts, restaurant charges, jewelry purchases. You created a paper trail that a child could follow." I could hear her breathing heavily through the phone. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to understand that your actions have consequences. You thought you could cheat on your husband with impunity because I was too nice, too passive, too grateful for your attention to fight back. That's not true. Isn't it? When was the last time you showed me any respect, Margot? When was the last time you treated my opinions, my feelings, or my contributions to this marriage as if they mattered? Victor, you turned our marriage into a performance where you were the star and I was comic relief. The blue-collar husband who didn't understand your sophisticated social world. The simple man who should be grateful that someone like you would lower herself to marry someone like me. I never said that. You didn't have to say it. You showed it every day for years. Every eye roll when I talked about my work. Every joke about my background at your fancy parties. Every decision you made without consulting me because my opinion wasn't worth considering. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if she'd hung up. So, this is revenge? This is education. You're learning what happens when you push someone past their breaking point. I'm coming over. We need to discuss this face to face. Actually, we don't. I'm done with discussions, negotiations, and explanations. You made your choice when you started sleeping with Kenneth. Now you get to live with the consequences. I ended the call and immediately dialed Tommy at the anchor. Victor, please tell me you're not calling with more bad ideas. I need you to spread the word through your network. Margot and Kenneth are going to be looking for allies, people who'll vouch for their character and help them manage the fallout from their situation. And you want to make sure they don't find any allies? I want to make sure people have all the relevant information before they decide whether to support someone who's violated professional ethics and marriage vows. You're playing with fire, my friend. I'm playing with people who thought they could burn me without consequences. There's a difference. That afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. Evelyn Cross, the senior partner at Margot's firm and Kenneth's business partner, knocked on my front door around 3 o'clock. Evelyn was in her 60s, with silver hair and the kind of sharp intelligence that had built Whitmore, Cross & Associates from a two-person practice into one of the region's most respected law firms. She was also notoriously protective of the firm's reputation. Mr. Ashford, I hope you don't mind the intrusion. Not at all, Ms. Cross. Please come in. I led her to the living room, noting how she studied the house with professional interest. Everything about Evelyn Cross suggested careful evaluation and strategic thinking. I'll come straight to the point. I understand you're having marital difficulties that involve one of our employees and my business partner. That's one way to describe adultery, yes. I'm not here to judge anyone's personal choices. I'm here because those personal choices are affecting my business. How so? Evelyn crossed her legs and leaned back in her chair, studying me with the same intensity she probably brought to cross-examinations. 3 potential clients have chosen other firms in the past 2 days. 2 of our current clients have asked uncomfortable questions about our leadership stability, and I've received calls from colleagues expressing concern about Kenneth's judgment. That sounds like a Kenneth problem, not a Victor problem. It becomes a Victor problem when the source of these concerns can be traced back to information that only you would have access to. I smiled. Are you accusing me of something, Ms. Cross? I'm observing that someone with detailed knowledge of Kenneth and Margot's relationship has been sharing that knowledge with people who have no legitimate need for such information. Define legitimate need. Don't play word games with me, Mr. Ashford. I've been practicing law longer than you've been married. Then you understand that truth is an absolute defense against claims of defamation. Everything I've shared with anyone has been factually accurate and supported by documentation. Evelyn's eyes sharpened. What documentation? I pulled out my folder of evidence. Hotel receipts, credit card records, security camera footage, photographs. The kind of documentation that would be admissible in divorce proceedings, professional disciplinary hearings, and civil litigation. She reviewed the papers with the careful attention of someone who understood their legal significance. This is quite thorough. I'm good at my job, Ms. Cross. Research, analysis, documentation. These are skills that transfer well from military intelligence to civilian problem solving. Military intelligence? 24 years in the Army, 12 of those in intelligence gathering and analysis. You learn to be very careful about facts and evidence when people's lives depend on the accuracy of your information. Evelyn set the papers aside and studied me with new interest. I underestimated you. Most people do. It's been a useful advantage throughout this situation. What do you want, Mr. Ashford? I want Kenneth and Margot to understand that their actions have consequences. I want them to experience the same kind of humiliation and professional damage that their affair has caused me. And then? And then we'll see how committed they are to each other when the relationship costs them something significant. Evelyn nodded slowly. You're testing their relationship by applying external pressure. I'm providing them with learning opportunities. That's a dangerous game. Cornered people make unpredictable choices. So do betrayed husbands. She stood to leave, gathering her purse with the efficient movements of someone accustomed to making quick decisions. A word of advice, Mr. Ashford. Kenneth is not as strong as he pretends to be. Push him too hard, and he'll break in ways that could hurt everyone involved, including you. Are you threatening me? I'm sharing professional insight. Kenneth's divorce was more traumatic than he admits publicly. His ex-wife's allegations of emotional abuse and controlling behavior weren't entirely fabricated. Meaning? Meaning that desperate men sometimes make choices that transform civil disputes into criminal matters. After Evelyn left, I sat in my living room thinking about her warning. Kenneth had seemed weak and frightened during our previous encounters, but weakness and fear could be just as dangerous as strength and confidence. I called Nina in Portland. Victor, how's your educational campaign progressing? It's working, but I may have complications. Kenneth's business partner just warned me that he might be unstable under pressure. What kind of unstable? The kind that turns civil disputes into criminal matters. Nina was quiet for several seconds. Victor, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Document every interaction you have with Kenneth and Margot. Record phone calls if it's legal in your state. Keep witnesses present during face-to-face meetings. And for the love of God, don't meet either of them alone in private locations. You think they're dangerous? I think desperate people make dangerous choices, and from what you've told me, they're both getting pretty desperate. That evening, I was working in my shop when the security system alerted me to movement in my driveway. The cameras showed Kenneth's Porsche pulling up to the house, followed by Margot's BMW. They were coming together, which suggested coordination and planning. That was either very good news or very bad news, depending on what they'd planned. I called Tommy. I need backup at the house. Kenneth and Margot just arrived together. On my way. Don't let them inside until I get there. I met them at the front door, staying on the porch with the door locked behind me. Kenneth looked like he hadn't slept in days, while Margot had the determined expression she wore when preparing for difficult negotiations. Victor. Margot stepped forward, her voice carefully controlled. We need to resolve this situation. Do we? Kenneth moved closer, his hands shaking slightly. This has gone far enough. You're destroying both our careers over a personal matter. A personal matter? I laughed. You mean your affair with my wife? Your violation of professional ethics? Your abuse of your position as managing partner to seduce a married employee? It's not like that, Margot said. Our relationship developed naturally. We didn't plan for this to happen. But it did happen, and now you're both learning that choices have consequences. Kenneth's face was flushed, his voice rising. You're a vindictive, small-minded man who can't accept that his wife found someone better. Someone better? I stepped closer, close enough to see the fear behind his anger. You mean someone who owns contaminated properties and uses legal technicalities to avoid environmental cleanup? Someone who pays hush money to avoid professional sanctions? Someone who's so weak and pathetic that he can't handle a little public scrutiny without falling apart? Kenneth's hands clenched into fists. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. I know about the EPA violations, the groundwater contamination, the legal delays, and the cover-ups. I know about your ex-wife's restraining order and her allegations of emotional abuse. I know about your financial problems and your desperate need to maintain your professional reputation at any cost. You're lying. I'm stating facts. Facts that will become public knowledge if you don't learn to control your temper and accept responsibility for your choices. Kenneth took another step forward, his face contorted with rage. I'll destroy you. You'll try. But here's the thing, Kenneth. I'm not your ex-wife. I'm not intimidated by your anger or impressed by your threats. I'm a man who spent 24 years in the military learning how to handle bullies and cowards. Tommy's truck pulled into the driveway behind their cars, and I saw Kenneth's attention shift to the new arrival. Backup? Margot asked. Witness, I corrected. Someone to document this conversation for legal purposes. Tommy approached the porch, his cop instincts clearly activated by the tension in the air. Evening, folks. Everything okay here? Just having a discussion about consequences and responsibility, I said. Kenneth looked between Tommy and me, probably calculating his options. This isn't over. No, I agreed, but it's about to get much more complicated for both of you. As they drove away, Tommy shook his head. That man is about to do something stupid. Probably, but that's his choice to make. And if his stupid choice puts you in danger, then I'll deal with that when it happens. Right now I'm focused on making sure they both understand the cost of their betrayal. Tommy studied my face in the porch light. You're not going to stop, are you? Would you? Probably not. But I'd be more careful about cornering dangerous animals. Kenneth's not dangerous. He's weak and scared and angry, but he's not dangerous. Weak, scared, angry people are the most dangerous kind, Victor. They have nothing left to lose. As I watched their taillights disappear down the street, I wondered if Tommy was right, but it was too late to change course now. The game was in motion, and I intended to see it through to the end. Wednesday morning brought news that changed everything. I was drinking coffee and monitoring the digital fallout from my campaign when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Nina's number. "Victor, we have a problem." "What kind of problem?" "The kind that involves police reports and restraining orders. Margot filed a complaint yesterday, claiming you've been harassing her and Kenneth through social media manipulation and professional sabotage." I set down my coffee mug, processing this development. What exactly did she claim? Cyberbullying, professional defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and stalking behavior. She's asking for a temporary restraining order that would prevent you from contacting her, Kenneth, or their workplace. Can she prove any of those claims? That's not the point, Victor. The point is that she's escalated this from a private marital dispute to a legal matter involving law enforcement. Even if her claims are groundless, the process itself will be expensive, time-consuming, and potentially damaging to your reputation. I walked to the window, looking out at the street where Kenneth had made his threats the night before. She's trying to use the legal system to silence me. Exactly. And it might work, at least temporarily. You need to be very careful about your next moves. What do you recommend? Hire a local attorney immediately. Document everything you've done to make sure it falls within legal boundaries. And for God's sake, stop whatever digital campaign you've been running. After we hung up, I called Tommy and filled him in on the latest development. "So they're fighting back through the courts," he said. "Smart move, actually." "How is that smart?" "Because it forces you to defend your actions instead of continuing your offensive. Even if you win, you lose time, money, and momentum. Unless I end this before it gets to court." "What do you mean?" "I mean it's time for the final move, the one that settles everything permanently." That afternoon, I drove to the offices of the local newspaper, the Harbor Chronicle. The editor, Janet Morrison, was an old friend from high school who'd built the paper's reputation on investigative journalism and community accountability. "Victor Ashford," she said, looking up from her computer. "I heard you were having some personal difficulties. News travels fast in a small town, especially when it involves prominent local figures. What can I do for you?" I placed my folder of evidence on her desk. "I have a story for you, about environmental contamination, legal cover-ups, and professional ethics violations." Janet opened the folder and began reviewing the documents with the practiced eye of an experienced journalist. "This is about Kenneth Draper? This is about public health and safety being compromised by someone who's supposed to uphold the law. And it has nothing to do with your marital problems?" "My marital problems are what led me to discover the information, but the information stands on its own merit." Janet continued reading, her expression growing more serious with each document. "These EPA violations are significant. If this contamination is as widespread as these reports suggest, it could affect hundreds of people. That's why I brought it to you. The public has a right to know when their drinking water is being contaminated by someone who's using legal technicalities to avoid cleanup responsibility. You understand that publishing this story will effectively destroy Kenneth's career?" "Kenneth's choices destroyed his career. I'm just making sure the consequences are proportional to the damage he's caused." Janet leaned back in her chair, studying me with the same intensity Evelyn Cross had shown. "This is revenge, Victor. This is justice. Kenneth thought he could violate professional ethics, damage the environment, and betray a colleague's trust without facing any meaningful consequences. He was wrong." "What about Margot? How does exposing Kenneth's business practices affect your wife?" "Margot chose to align herself with Kenneth both personally and professionally. She'll have to live with the consequences of that choice." Janet gathered the documents and placed them back in the folder. "I'll need to verify this information independently before we can publish anything." "Of course, but you'll find that everything is documented and verifiable through public records." "How long do I have before this becomes moot?" "Margot filed for a restraining order yesterday. If it's granted, I won't be able to continue providing information about Kenneth's activities. So this is your final move? This is my checkmate. That evening, I received a call from an unknown number. The voice was Kenneth's, but strained and desperate in a way I'd never heard before. Victor, we need to meet, tonight. I don't think that's a good idea, Kenneth. Margot filed a police complaint claiming I've been harassing you. Forget about that. This is bigger than the restraining order. What's bigger? I know what you gave to Janet Morrison. If that story runs, it won't just destroy my career. It'll destroy the entire firm, including Margot. I considered hanging up, but curiosity won. Where do you want to meet? The pier, 11 p.m. Come alone. I don't meet desperate men alone in isolated locations, Kenneth. Then bring your friend, but come. This ends tonight, one way or another. I called Tommy and explained the situation. This sounds like a trap, he said. Probably, but it's also an opportunity to finish this. What if Kenneth's planning something violent? Then we'll deal with that when it happens, but I don't think he has the courage for violence. Famous last words. The pier at 11 p.m. was exactly what you'd expect from a small coastal town in late autumn, cold, windy, and mostly deserted except for the occasional dog walker or late-night fisherman. Tommy and I arrived first, positioning ourselves near the harbor master's office where security cameras would record whatever happened. Kenneth arrived 10 minutes late, driving his Porsche with the kind of reckless speed that suggested panic. He got out of the car and walked toward us with the unsteady gait of someone who'd been drinking. Victor. His voice was thick with alcohol and desperation. Thank you for coming. What do you want, Kenneth? I want to make a deal. What kind of deal? Kenneth pulled out a manila envelope and held it toward me. Everything. Bank account information, property deeds, business records, personal correspondence. Everything you need to destroy me completely. I took the envelope but didn't open it. Why would you give me this? Because if Janet Morrison publishes that story, it won't just destroy me. It'll destroy Evelyn, the firm, and everyone who works there, including Margot. So I'm offering you a choice. Take everything I have, my money, my property, my reputation, but leave the firm out of it. Leave Margot out of it. I studied his face in the harsh light from the pier's security lamps. You're willing to sacrifice yourself to protect her? I'm willing to accept responsibility for my choices. Tommy moved closer, probably sensing the same thing I was sensing. This conversation was about to take an unexpected turn. What exactly are you proposing? I asked. Kenneth pulled out a second envelope, this one containing what looked like legal documents. My resignation from the firm effective immediately, a confession of professional misconduct, and a financial settlement that gives you everything you'd get in a divorce, plus compensation for emotional damages. How much compensation? $2 million, everything I have. I opened the first envelope and scanned the contents, bank statements showing accounts with substantial balances, property deeds for his penthouse, his vacation home, and the contaminated commercial properties, investment portfolios worth more than I'd made in my entire career. This is everything you own? Everything that matters. What about the environmental cleanup? Already arranged. I've hired a remediation company to begin work next week, regardless of what happens with the legal proceedings. I looked at Tommy, who was watching this exchange with the fascination of someone witnessing a complete psychological breakdown. Why? I asked Kenneth. Why are you doing this? Kenneth's composure finally cracked completely. Because you were right. About everything. I am weak and pathetic and desperate. I destroyed my first marriage through controlling behavior and emotional abuse. I've been cutting corners and violating ethics for years to maintain an image that was never real. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, no longer caring about appearances. And I dragged Margot into it because I was too selfish and cowardly to face my problems alone. So this is guilt? This is acceptance. You wanted me to understand the consequences of my choices? I understand them. I understand that I'm not the man I pretended to be, and I understand that pretending has cost me everything that actually mattered. I studied the legal documents, resignation letters, confession statements, financial transfer agreements. Everything was professionally prepared and legally binding. What happens to Margot? That's between you and her, but she'll keep her job, her reputation, and her future. Whatever you decide about your marriage, she won't pay the professional price for my mistakes. And you? Kenneth looked out at the dark water of the harbor. I'll probably leave town, start over somewhere else, if that's possible at my age. I folded the documents and placed them back in the envelope. This doesn't change what you did. No, but it might prevent what I was about to do. Which was? Something that would have hurt everyone, including people who don't deserve to be hurt. Tommy stepped forward. Kenneth, are you okay? Do you need someone to call? Kenneth shook his head. I'm fine. Or I will be, eventually. He turned back to me. Do we have a deal? I looked at the envelopes in my hands. The complete financial destruction of a man who'd betrayed my trust and violated my marriage. Everything I'd wanted when this started, handed to me without a fight. I need to think about this. How long? 24 hours. Kenneth nodded and walked back to his car. As he drove away, Tommy shook his head in amazement. That man just gave you everything he owns. Yeah. You're not going to take it, are you? I looked out at the harbor, watching the lights of distant boats bobbing in the darkness. I don't know. A week ago I would have said yes, without hesitation. But now I'm wondering if destroying him completely makes me better than him, or just makes me another kind of bully. What about Margot? Margot made her choices. She'll have to live with the consequences, whatever I decide about Kenneth. As we walked back to our cars, I realized that the game had changed completely. Kenneth's surrender had transformed my revenge into something else, a choice about what kind of man I wanted to be when the anger finally burned itself out. The envelopes in my hands represented the complete victory I'd planned from the beginning. But victory, it turned out, felt more complicated than I'd expected. 24 hours to decide whether justice required Kenneth's complete destruction or whether mercy might be a more powerful form of revenge. Either way, the game was almost over. Thursday morning arrived gray and cold, matching the complexity of the decision I faced. Kenneth's surrender had given me everything I'd wanted, complete victory, total vindication, and the power to destroy the man who'd betrayed me. But power, I was learning, was more complicated than revenge. I spent the morning reviewing Kenneth's financial documents, calculating exactly what his offer meant. $2 million, plus properties, plus investments, enough money to retire comfortably and never think about computer repairs again. Enough to start over anywhere I wanted, with anyone I chose. The phone rang around noon. Margot's name appeared on the caller ID. Victor, Kenneth told me about his offer. Did he? You can't seriously be considering taking everything he owns. Why not? Isn't that what consequences look like? This isn't about consequences anymore. This is about cruelty. I leaned back in my chair, studying the ceiling of my workshop. Cruelty? That's interesting, coming from someone who spent weeks lying to my face while sleeping with her boss. I know I hurt you. I know I made terrible choices, but destroying Kenneth won't undo any of that. No, but it might prevent him from hurting other people the way he hurt me. He's already learned his lesson, Victor. Can't you see that? What I see is a man who got caught and is trying to buy his way out of the consequences. The silence stretched between us, filled with 22 years of shared history and recent betrayal. What do you want me to say? She finally asked. I want you to understand that your choices broke something that can't be fixed. Whether I take Kenneth's money or not, whether I publish his environmental crimes or not, our marriage is over. I know. Do you? Because you've spent the past week acting like this was all a misunderstanding that could be resolved through negotiation. I was hoping. You were hoping I'd be the same accommodating, forgiving husband I've always been. The man who'd swallow his pride and accept whatever scraps of attention you decided to throw his way. That's not fair. Fair? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to discuss fair? Fair would have been ending our marriage before you started sleeping with Kenneth. Fair would have been honest conversation about your unhappiness instead of elaborate deception. Fair would have been treating me with enough respect to tell me the truth. You're right. The admission surprised me. In 22 years of marriage, Margot had rarely admitted being wrong about anything. I'm right about what? All of it. I should have been honest with you years ago about how I felt. I should have ended our marriage before I got involved with Kenneth. I should have treated you with more respect. So why didn't you? Because I was a coward. Because it was easier to pretend everything was fine than to face the truth about what our marriage had become. I set down the phone and walked to the window, looking out at the street where this had all started with Kenneth's midnight visit. What truth? That we stopped being partners years ago and became strangers sharing a house. That I resented your contentment with a life I found suffocating. That you deserved someone who appreciated what you had to offer instead of constantly wishing you were someone else. The honesty was more painful than the betrayal had been. At least betrayal was something I could fight against. So what happens now? Now we get divorced, and you decide whether to destroy Kenneth in the process. What do you think I should do? I think you should do whatever helps you sleep at night. After we hung up, I called Janet Morrison at the newspaper. Victor, have you decided about the environmental story? I'm still thinking about it, but I have a question for you. Shoot. If Kenneth voluntarily resigns from his firm, confesses to professional misconduct, and pays for environmental cleanup, does the public still need to know about his violations? Janet was quiet for several seconds. That depends on whether you think justice requires public humiliation or just accountability. What's the difference? Accountability means he faces consequences and makes things right. Humiliation means everyone knows exactly how he failed. Which serves the public interest better? Probably accountability. Public humiliation is more about satisfying our desire for revenge than protecting community welfare. That afternoon, I drove to Kenneth's penthouse with both envelopes in my car. He answered the door looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past 24 hours. Victor, have you decided? I've decided. I handed him back the envelope containing his financial information. I don't want your money, Kenneth. The relief on his face was immediate and overwhelming. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I'm keeping the confession and resignation documents. You're going to follow through on cleaning up the environmental damage, and you're going to leave town as you promised. Of course. And Kenneth? If you ever contact my wife again, if you ever try to return to legal practice in this state, if you ever put another family through what you put mine through, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man you really are. Understood. As I drove home, I realized that mercy felt more powerful than revenge would have. Kenneth would face consequences, professional disgrace, financial cost, exile from the community he'd tried so hard to impress. But he'd also have the opportunity to rebuild his life into something more honest than what he'd lost. That evening, I called Nina to update her on my decision. You gave back $2 million? I gave back the opportunity to become someone I didn't want to be. That's either very wise or very stupid. Probably both. What about Margot? Margot and I are getting divorced, but we're going to do it like adults without trying to destroy each other in the process. You've changed, Victor. Yeah, I think I have. 6 months later, I was sitting on the deck of my new house, smaller than the one I'd shared with Margot but entirely mine, when Tommy stopped by with beer and updates on the local gossip. Kenneth left town last month, he said, Heard he took a job with a public defender's office in Vermont. Good for him. Margot's been dating someone new, that investment banker from the yacht club. Good for her, too. Tommy studied my face, probably looking for signs of lingering bitterness. You really mean that, don't you? I really do. She deserves to be with someone who wants the same kind of life she wants. And you? I looked out at the harbor, where boats were coming in with the evening tide. I'm learning to be content with the life I actually have instead of trying to live up to someone else's expectations. Any regrets? About the divorce? No. About how I handled the revenge, sometimes. Why? Because I came closer to becoming someone I didn't like than I want to admit. Kenneth's surrender saved me from finding out how far I was willing to go. Tommy raised his beer in a mock toast to narrow escapes and second chances, to learning the difference between justice and revenge. As the sun set over the harbor, I realized that the best revenge had turned out to be living well. Not despite what had happened, but because of what I'd learned about myself in the process. The game was over, and everyone had won something, even if it wasn't what they'd originally wanted. Sometimes that's the best kind of victory.